Many dough encrusted meat or veggie pies are the ultimate street food. Today, we are all about the Jamaican mini meat pie or pastry by way of the British from India and Africa. Wherever you go, you can find handheld indulgences such as the Asian samosa, Greek spanakopita, the Spanish and Latin American empanada, as examples. The traditional Jamaican mini meat pies consist of a uniquely flavored pie dough spiced with turmeric for a beautiful yellow coloring and filled with a spicy seasoned ground beef. These pies have world influences thanks to a Cornish pasty inspired dough from England along with turmeric and curry from India and West Africa. My recipe contains many of the most common herbs and spices found in Jamaican cuisine, including the Scotch bonnet chili pepper, if you can find it, along with allspice, thyme, ginger, curry, cumin, and cayenne pepper. I think Jamaica got it right in creating a hearty street food that satiates and provides a taste of the world. There's no wonder why Jamaicans' national motto is, out of many, one people. They honor their international roots with their traditional dishes. For the ingredients, you'll need the pie dough includes all-purpose flour, salt, turmeric, cold butter, shortening, ice-cold water, and an egg. The filling includes vegetable oil, butter, onion, garlic, fresh ginger, ground beef or ground turkey, chicken, or lamb, curry powder, cumin, allspice, thyme, scallions, Italian parsley, beef broth or other broth or water, salt, black pepper, and for heat, cayenne pepper and Scotch bonnet chili pepper or habanero if you can find them. First step is to make the pie dough. Combine 480 grams of flour, which is 4 cups. Of course, that is fluffed in the container, spooned into your cup, and then leveled off. To that, we're gonna add 1.5 teaspoons of salt. And then the secret ingredient for this pie crust is turmeric. And we're gonna add 2 teaspoons. With a spoon or a pastry blender, just do a quick little mix of all of this. We're gonna add in 8 tablespoons of very cold butter. I like to make sure my butter stays in the fridge until right before I use it in this. We wanna make sure that pastry becomes light and flaky. We're also gonna add 8 tablespoons of shortening. And I like to put my shortening in the refrigerator for about 30 minutes before I start making pie dough. And the shortening is also gonna make it flaky. And then either using a pastry cutter like I'm using, you can use your hands for this. You could use a food processor for this. I prefer not to touch the butter and the shortening because the heat of your hands will warm it up and your pastry might not be as flaky. Cut in the butter and shortening until your mixture resembles small peas or coarse cornmeal. Okay, notice our small peas or coarse cornmeal, as my grandmother would call it. And this is standard for any pie dough that you make. These chunks of fat that you see, when they melt in the oven and start baking and cook the dough, they become air pockets, and that's what creates the flakiness in your pie crust. We're gonna add the wet. We're gonna start with ice cold water. I always put ice in a measuring cup and add at least 1 cup of water and stick it in the fridge for about 30 minutes before I begin. To prevent the ice from getting into my cup here, I'm gonna add a little strainer here to catch the ice. And we're gonna start with 2/3 cup of water, and we'll add more as we need it. Slowly pour in the water. And then as you do so, use the fork to moisten your flour mixture. You can press it up against the side of the bowl. That tends to work well to make sure that you're getting all of it. Okay, I've used my 2/3 of a cup. My dough still looks dry, so we're gonna add a little bit more water. So we wanna make sure all the flour pretty much gets moistened. We don't want our dough to look wet, and we don't want our dough to look dry. And then after you use that 2/3 of a cup, just start adding a tablespoon at a time. Okay, when I think I have enough liquid, I do go back with my hands and do a quick touching of the dough and making sure it can hold its shape. That way I know it's not too dry. If it's breaking apart too much, then you might need to add some more water. Our dough is holding its shape. Notice the white specks of shortening in the dough. Divide your dough in half roughly. Place 1/2 on plastic wrap. Place the other half on another plastic wrap. Just cover it loosely and then flatten it out in a disc. You're gonna do this for both of them. It just makes it easier for us to roll them out into a round shape when we're ready to make our pies. Since these are ready to go, we're gonna place them in the fridge for at least 30 minutes to allow them to set up and stay cold while we make the meat filling. In the meantime, it's filling time. So we need to have a 12-inch skillet. We're gonna add 1 tablespoon of vegetable oil. You can just eyeball that. And then we're gonna add a tablespoon of butter. I like to mix butter and oil when I'm sauteing ingredients because I like the combination of the fat in both of them. You get the flavor from the butter, and then you get, of course, the fat from the neutral oil as well. You can use 2 tablespoons of oil or 2 tablespoons of butter, or you can break it up like I have. It's totally up to you. So we're gonna heat this on medium-high heat until the butter sizzles. Our butter is melted and sizzling. If you're not using butter, you're only using oil, and you can't tell if your oil is hot enough, just place an onion piece, and if the onion sizzles, that tells you that your fat is warm enough, and ours is. We're sizzling all around that onion. So now we're gonna add 1 medium diced onion. We're gonna cook our onion until the onion is translucent, and that'll take about 5 minutes. Since this filling has so many ingredients, it's great to have a mise en place ready before you start making the meat filling. Mise en place is French for having everything ready to go. I've got my ingredients measured out, everything's cut up that needs to be cut up, and so all I have to do is put them in the pan when they're ready, and we are pretty much ready. If you look at our onion, that looks good. It's nice and translucent. So now we're gonna add 4 cloves of minced garlic, 1 tablespoon of minced ginger, and this is fresh ginger. You want to stir this just for about a minute until fragrant. You want to get that raw flavor off before we add our other ingredients. Now it's time to add the ground meat. You can use lamb, chicken, turkey. I'm using beef because that is traditional. To that, we're going to add in 1 teaspoon of curry, 1 teaspoon of ground cumin, half a teaspoon of allspice, very traditional in Jamaican cuisine, 1 tablespoon of chopped fresh thyme. You could use 1 teaspoon of dried. I've used dried herbs in this recipe, and it still makes a good dish. At this point, you would also add your Scotch bonnet pepper or habanero if you're using it. If you want a lot of spice, leave the seeds and the rib in the peppers. If you don't like a lot of spice, leave them out, or at least cut out the seeds and the peppers. It just depends on how much heat you want. Now we're just going to break up the meat, and we're going to continue to cook until the meat has browned, and that'll take about 10 minutes. Oh, I wish you could smell the spices and the herbs in this. This smells incredibly flavorful. Now, what I typically do when I'm dealing with raw meat, once my meat cooks, I switch out utensils. I don't know if it makes much a difference or not, but I just feel better changing out utensils to a cleaner one now that I'm adding fresher ingredients that won't be heating up as much. So now we're going to add in 4 chopped scallions, white and green parts, 1/4 cup of chopped fresh, I prefer Italian parsley, it has a nice flavor, and 1/2 cup of broth, whether that's beef, veggie, chicken. You can even use water here. And we're going to add a teaspoon of salt. If you're using water, I would use 1.5 teaspoons of salt. Add 1/2 teaspoon of black pepper. For this next ingredient, you can leave it out. I'm adding 1/4 teaspoon of cayenne pepper. You can add 1/2 teaspoon, a teaspoon, it's whatever you want, depending on, again, how much heat you like. And just mix it all together. Now we're gonna leave this on medium-high. We're gonna let all of the ingredients soak in that broth. Now that the broth is boiling, we're going to turn the heat down to simmer, and we're going to let this simmer for about 10 minutes until the broth has pretty much evaporated and soaked into the ingredients. Okay, your meat mixture's done when the liquid is evaporated, which it has. So at this point, you would want to taste it. Everything's cooked, so give it a quick taste. Add any seasoning that you want that's lacking. This is really good. I think it has plenty of salt in it. Ooh, I just got a little bit of that cayenne pepper. Yikes. So you can add, of course, as much or as little seasoning as you want. I've actually made this with 0 pepper in it, and it was still really good because that meat is super flavorful. Turn off your heat. I prefer to put this in a separate bowl just because it's going to make it easier for me to pull out the meat that I need to fill the pies. It's up to you though. You can leave it in the skillet if you want. We're going to set our meat filling aside and then let it cool a little bit before we fill our pies. And you need to go ahead and preheat your oven to 375 degrees. And then you need to prepare the pan. You need a large baking sheet in which you place a sheet of parchment paper. Just set that aside. And we're going to go ahead and beat 1 egg into a small bowl. Had a shell that just flew out there. Okay, we're going to set our beaten egg aside for now. Now that's where we actually shape and fill our pies. Go ahead and take one of those discs out of the refrigerator. And I like to separate them by doing half at a time just because it's easier to manipulate the dough and I don't have this huge massive amount of a round circle that I'm having to cut through. And flour your work surface. And then just place your disc on that surface. To cut out the rounds, you're gonna need a glass or a bowl that's about 4 to 6 inches wide. This is actually a trifle dish. This is the best thing I could find in my house. This is 4 inches wide. So what I'm likely gonna do is roll mine out just a little bit more once I cut it out. But this is about the size that you need, 4 to 6 inches. Flour your rolling pin and just roll your disc out to about 1/8 of an inch thick. Look at all those white spots and yellow, additional yellow spots from the butter and the shortening. Once you have it rolled out, mine's not quite 1/8 of an inch thick, so I'm gonna go back and flatten my circles out even more after I cut them out. Then just take your glass or whatever that you're gonna use and cut out your rounds and then just place them aside. Now, if you don't have a container that you can easily stamp out your rounds, like I have a little handle on mine, but if I didn't have a handle on mine here, what I would do would just take a knife and then just go around the circle like this. And lift up, and you get your round pie. Once you've cut out enough circles that you can get out of that sheet of pie dough, go ahead and reform it back into that ball. I don't really like doing this because, again, I'm using my hands. That is melting the fat, and I don't really like that, but we've got extra dough, so we need to use it up. I can still see the fat blobs in there, so that tells us it's gonna be still a flaky dough. All right, I've got a little bit of dough left. I'm just gonna put it aside for right now. I think I've rolled it out as much as it needs to be rolled out. We're gonna get about 12 pies out of this first half. Take one round. If you think you can roll it a little bit thinner, go ahead and add a little bit more of a roll to it to get a thinner, and it makes a little bit bigger pie. But remember, this is the size of a pie crust. It should be as thin as a pie crust, so we don't want thick here. We're gonna add 1 to 2 tablespoons of meat mixture. You're just going to go based on the size of your pie dough. We want it to look nice because we want it to be a thick pie. Take your beaten egg, and then we're just going to do a little wash around the edges of the circle here of the dough. Then take up one side, fold it over to where your edges meet. Be a nice half moon. Take a fork, rub it in a little bit of flour, and then we're going to crease with the tines the edge of our pastry all the way around, so we seal it so that meat filling does not come out. And that is our first pie. Place it in the pan like so, leaving about a 1/2 inch space between each pie. And then we just repeat the same step with the rest of these. We still have half our meat mixture left. We still have plenty of egg left. Brush egg on top of the pastries. Top and back side there. And the purpose of the egg is just to enhance that yellow, shiny turmeric coloring that we're seeing there. Okay, our pastries are ready for the oven. Okay, place your pastries in the oven that's preheated. We're gonna bake them for 30 minutes or until golden brown. While the first half are baking, I'm gonna go ahead and prepare the other half. That way they'll be ready to go. When that batch comes out of the oven, then I can place the last batch in the oven. Our first batch is done, hot right out of the oven. We'll enjoy these while the others are now baking. In Jamaica, they are often served with a simple yeast bun called cocoa bun. Though there's no coconut or cocoa powder included, it's just the name. And there's always a little hot sauce on the side. Still hot, we want to eat them when they're hot. Let's take a look at that nice golden color. Got a little bit of golden brown, yellow brown on the top from the egg. Nice golden brown at the bottom. I love the tines, just keep it together. This is truly a handheld street food. Easy hand pie. I can see the crispiness of the crust there as it bulges out. Let's take a cut into it. And that's what it looks like on the inside. Notice that the meat has filled the pie on the inside. The little crust is flaking off there. I like that you can see the meat, you can see the parsley, the green onions, has a nice smell to it as well. I like the tines. They serve two purposes. They provide a decorative edge as well as seal the filling in on the inside. The ratio to meat to pie crust is great. The pie crust is thin enough, you can still enjoy the flavorful filling on the inside. You could sub the ground meat for your favorite veggies like zucchini and mushrooms to make this dish vegetarian. Check out the recipe link below in the description for details on storing, freezing, and reheating these pies. I also give you suggestions and quantities on meat substitutions to make these vegetarian or even crustless. The meat is great over rice. Thanks for watching and your much needed and appreciated support. Until next time, go bake the world.